Just record. There we are, just so that you know we're recording. Last year for the Churches Unlocked Festival, for those of you who don't know what Churches Unlocked is, it was a pilot project set up by Sarah, who I work with. She's a Churches Development Officer in Llandaf. And as I said, she can't be with us today, which is why you're stuck with me. So sorry about that. The idea was hers, and we want to encourage more people to go to church. So we selected 10 churches across the diocese, a real mix of historic churches, those that are listed, unlisted, a real mix. And for 1 week in June last year, those churches were open, if not every day, then a good part of each day. There were a whole series of different events, organ recitals, choir evenings, poetry readings, there was art exhibitions, coffee mornings, all sorts of things, all designed to get people who wouldn't normally go to a church to come in and to have a look around. There were volunteers on hand to give them a history of the church and to answer any questions that they might have. And one of those events was this Heritage Recording Day, which we did in St. John's in Troy-de-Rue. And I say we because the diocese worked very closely with Berwyn and his colleagues at People's Collection Wales, and Berwyn will go into more detail with that. So that's the background to it then. The specifics of the event were that we used local connections to publicize the event, as well as Facebook and more widely. People were asked to bring along any items related to the church specifically and the community in general. So most people brought along photos of themselves at a christening or a wedding, attending the church, or photos of the church, that sort of thing. And then with Berwyn, we scanned these in and they were uploaded onto the People's Collection site. It was a morning event, and then in the afternoon then we had a talk with a local historian who gave a potted history of the church and Troy-de-Rue. And it was really successful, both as an event, and the whole week we had something like 3,000 visitors across those participating churches. And it was so successful that we are doing it again this year, and we are working in partnership with the Diocese of Monmouth. So it's back, it's bigger and better, as they say. So that's the background. There are a few things which I thought I'd share with you, some useful pointers, as it were. And I just need to share my screen. Bear with me. Right. This won't be death by PowerPoint. There's just the one slide, which hopefully you'll find useful. And don't worry, oops. It's all going so well. Okay. Don't worry about writing all this down. I'll send it to all of you once the event is over. So a few things to think about then before you embark on one of these events. As with any event, it's essential to plan, and to plan well in advance. Think about access to your church or chapel. Make it easy for people to get there in terms of accessibility, people in wheelchairs, parents with prams, pushchairs, and so on. Refreshments. Never underestimate the power of a cup of tea and a Welsh cake to draw people in. They'll come for that alone. It's always good to have refreshments, and with that, hopefully, toilets are available as well. Depending on when you hold the event, there are pros and cons between holding it on a weekend or a weekday. If you hold it on a weekday, our experience was that it's more retired people who are going to come along. If it's at 2 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, a lot of people are working, or mothers are picking up children from school and so on. If you have the event on a weekend, you may well get a totally different audience. It could be more families, that sort of thing. So bear that in mind when you're planning to hold this sort of event. The most important thing, I think, though, is, as the third point says, do what's within your volunteer capacity. So if you've got 2 or 3 really good volunteers who are able to help, plan the event around what they and you are comfortable with. It's no good planning something that's going to take a whole day and you're going to struggle to do. It's always best to start small and work up from there. As it says, try half a day. In Troyderoo, as I said, we did a morning session. People brought their items to be scanned, and then in the afternoon there was a talk from a local historian, and the two together worked really well. It was the heritage aspect of it in the morning, and then the local history in the afternoon. So it was a good mix of the two. Also, we had a display of heritage material, old photos of the church, items from the church's past, so that people could look at and perhaps jog memories and so on over a cup of tea or coffee while waiting for their turn. Publicity. I've already said that local networks work really well. We published the event on Facebook, on the diocese website, and Berrien as well put it on the People's Collection site as well. But what we found from talking to people, they heard about it through word of mouth, through people in church, the Mothers Union, the WI, their own local Facebook groups. So don't underestimate the power of local advertising. It is still really powerful. And that leads on to the next point. You won't have much idea beforehand of how many people will turn up. It could be that you have very few people, or it could be like an episode of the Antiques Roadshow where they're snaking off down the street and that they're all standing there with these huge things. So bear that in mind and think about that in advance. What is your contingency plan if you do get a rush? Berrien hopefully will be able to talk about that a little bit more in a minute, but having items on display already, it helps to pass the time if there are quite a lot of people. It's quite it can be quite an involved process. If you brought a photograph along, it's quite easy to scan and to upload, but someone has to gather the information from the person who's brought it along. If they bring a Ming vase, for instance, it's going to be quite difficult to scan that, believe me. So think about, perhaps, again, if you've got a small number of volunteers, rather than have people turn up with suitcases full of things to be scanned, perhaps think about in advance of asking them to bring either one item that's really important to them or is interesting in terms of the church's history, or a few items, things that are easier to scan, such as photos, so that we can get as much information as possible and you don't have a really long queue. And although it is a Heritage Day, it's a really good opportunity for getting people into the church and showing them what the church is like in the 21st century. It's a really good way of promoting what you do on a daily and a weekly basis. So think about having leaflets, flyers available, the vicar, if possible, the church wardens, so that they can talk to people who perhaps would like to come to church but wouldn't ordinarily just walk into a church. It can be a good opener. And with that done, I'm going to hand over now to Berrien, who's going to talk to you more about the specifics of this and the People's Collection side of it. And then, as I say, at the end, we'll stop for questions. I stop my screen and hand over to Berrien.
Great, thank you, Martin, and yeah, thank you everyone for joining this afternoon. So I think Martin's sort of laid it out quite nicely there, and so I'll go in to explain a bit more about People's Collection, what we do, and how we supported that particular Heritage Day, and work with communities, groups, and individuals across Wales. So rather than looking at my face, I'll be sharing my screen. here we are. So I'm not sure how many of you are aware of People's Collection and what it is and what we do, but I'll just briefly sort of go a bit slightly. But if you want any more information, yeah, please feel free to ask a question at the end, or you can get in contact to us through the site as well. So essentially, the crown jewel, if you like, in the People's Collection program is the website, and the project as a whole is run in partnership between National Library of Wales, National Museum, and the Royal Commission on the Ancient and Historical Monuments of Wales. So there are staff members across those three, institutions, organisations that contributes to the work that People's Collection does, both on the technical side of the website, but also on the community level of providing training and support for things like collection days, and if you just want to digitize materials that you have at home as well. So that the fruits of all that labour really comes through in the website. So here, if I go into the collection, here is the accumulation of all the material that's been contributed across the, about 10 years or so the People's Collection has been running. So you can see there around 150,000 items. So these are items, and to sort of go over some of the, I'll try and go through some of the terminology I'll be referring to the rest of the presentation as well. So when I say an item, I mean a photograph or a audio recording or a video recording or a document, whether that be paper-based or digital-based. So that sort of item level is something that can be digitized or perhaps already digital that can be contributed to the site. And these are contributed by everyone from an individual that has items in a shoebox under the bed or in the attic, up to institutions that work nationally, internationally, and obviously in between we have projects, historical groups, general groups of people coming together to try and capture, document, and share the history of a particular topic, whether that be their local church, their local community, a particular event or historical or even contemporary occurrence in that is important to them. So hopefully the whole point of People's Collection is to give voice to the community, to that grassroots level, that the story of Wales comes through from the people of Wales. And beyond as well. We have groups in North America, societies and all that as well. So there's plenty to discover anyway. So through the site, there are various ways of searching, and we have help pages on the top here as well. That goes into a bit more detail than I have time to go through today, but most direct way, I suppose, is to use a keyword to search for materials. So if I go that as an example, so that searches through the entire site and all the contributors for anything that has been uploaded that has Llandav in the information that's been provided with that item. So I can see here there's variations from sort of landscape views, postcards, well, a few, obviously, the cathedral, items here from one project that was the work of a botanist. So there's all sorts of like variation. And on the side here as well, we can see the contributors. So every item that is contributed to the site is done so through an account or a profile. I should point out that everything on the site is, creating an account or contributing is free. There's no charge or anything like that associated with working with us. So here in the Diocese of Llandav are all the items that were digitized as part of the Troed yr Rhyw Heritage Day. So if I scroll down here, as you can see, variations of personal photographs, weddings, documents, flyers. It's quite a rich a collection day, actually, quite a nice variation of material. So I've got a few examples here. For instance, I think Sarah put this one. So Easter Bonnet Parade, Troedd Rhyw. It's a great image, and we have the information to go along with it here. And this is what we refer to as an item page. So every item page will have the digital image or document or audio or whatever it might be, along with a title to help for it to be discovered in the first place by searching through keyword searches and so on. A description to add any more information regarding the item, or to give more context, or perhaps a bit more background information to the people in the photograph, or a story behind the photograph. And ways of categorizing and sort of giving a tag to every item as well. Along with that, there are ways of putting things into collections as well, like this one, sort of St. John's the Baptist Church in Troedd Rhyw. Various items are within that collection, and this being one of them. This was a good example of what is ideal within a collection day. And when Martin mentioned, sometimes it takes time to just gather that information from the individual. So it's not just a matter of, here's a photograph, scan it or photograph it to make it digital and then upload it. There's the information behind it. So like this, we have names, location, or talk of location actually. We're able to map an item to or locate an item on our digital maps as well. So with every image, sometimes there is a story, and I remember this one. So when you're sitting down and collecting the information about, where that photograph comes from, you might get some absolute thinkers like this. So the contributor on that day told us the story about the wedding day breakfast. One of the families killed a pig that they had reared, but it was a particular, to read from there, it was a particularly nasty sow, and must have seen its future, and apparently sort of sat down in the middle of the road, causing all sorts of flummox in the local community on the day of the wedding. So that gives, you wouldn't get that just from that photograph. So by collecting this information, it gives so much more richness to that photograph, gives some social history and community history along with a beautiful photograph as well. So that, I think, is a big part of involving the community in days like these. So like Martin mentioned, if someone comes with a big box of photographs with tens or hundreds, you will not have the time in a day to collect all that information to make that item resourceful and an interesting sort of contribution. By selecting a select few with perhaps that's important to them or to their family, or perhaps have stories like these associated with them. This it certainly adds to a lot to this item, the collections that we hold. Another just a few couple examples before, unfortunately, I will be going into a PowerPoint. This is a particularly nice photograph. So I think 3 generations of vicars and the warden. So a nice photograph here with the names and the time as vicars in Troedd Rhyw, and this item as well. We have the back of the photograph as well with a bit of information that is also captured within the information given, but sometimes it's nice to capture an item in its entirety. So this is what we refer to, another term I'm going to probably use quite a few times, is a multi-part item. So would that be a photograph this with information, photographic on the front and a notation on the back? It's still one item, so it's a multi-part item because there are more than one digital files associated with it. A good example of this is another we collected on the day in Troedd Rhyw, Pinterpark Parish magazine. So I don't know how many pages there are, 17 pages, but on this then item page, all of the pages are able to be viewed, explored, and read in a bit more detail. There we go. So obviously, to get to this point of uploading is not as simple as just uploading. Of course, there's quite a lot of work involved in capturing that the information related to that item, preparing the images, and there's also because People's Collection, we endeavour to be a trusted publisher of material. So a little bit different, for instance, to say something like Facebook or I don't know, Instagram or anything like that, where images that can be uploaded without much thought, perhaps, of the provenance of that item. So to be a trusted publisher of material, there's also the ownership and getting consent of the contributor or the copyright holder before publishing on the site. So I'll go straight to this one. Hopefully everyone can see that. So yeah, so this is essentially the workflow that we advise any sort of project that we work with. Obviously, it looks a little daunting to begin with, but essentially this gives us a route to follow to make sure that when we, at the end of a process, all the materials that we've collected, we know exactly our rights to be able to use them for publishing on People's Collection, or perhaps later down the line you might want to use these as part of an exhibition, or anything within the community and that kind of thing. So the consent and the provenance of the original item itself. So call that sort of clearing the copyright of that item. The information that's associated with it, so those stories, the title, categorizing the information, and we refer to this in archiving as sort of the metadata to go along with that item. Then, of course, the actual digitizing itself, whether that be only for uploading on People's Collection, or perhaps you're thinking of creating a digital archive for your community as well, or for your church. Again, there are various ways and approaches to how you can go about this. And after completing those top three sort of processes, then you have the outcomes, such as creating that digital archive, publishing the material on People's Collection, or creating exhibitions. Perhaps you want to use them as in a local publication or something like that as well. So by having these stages completed fully, you're clearing the way for other uses as well. Obviously, normally this kind of process takes days, weeks, years, depending on the size of the project. With collection days, obviously it's fast and tight, as it were. So this is again, I can send these to Martin to share with you as well, so don't feel the need to make any notes. This is the kind of the workflow of a particular collection day that we tend to follow. Again, those three sort of stages of clearing the copyright and getting the consent of the owner, collecting the metadata, the information to go in the item, and then digitizing it for at the end of that process as well. So all set out. It looks a little bit scary here, but in reality, it looks more like this. So we have at the end here, so the meet and greet, so explaining what we are doing on the day, also getting going through the material and deciding which ones are going to be digitized, then getting to give consent for them to be digitized and published on People's Collection as well. So in the middle here, noting down that information, so that metadata to go along with the item, and then we were passing it on to Martin here at the end, who has digitized the material before returning the original documents or items then to their owners. So it's quite a again, like Martin mentioned, if there's a massive box of material, you soon find yourself quite clogged and perhaps not giving enough time to capture enough material from various contributors rather than just one. So again, that's something to keep in mind when you're publicizing a event like this. Like say, sort of limiting that, so bring, no more than 10 or something like that. Again, also down to resources as well. How many volunteers do you have available in the day to do that sort of collecting the information and digitizing?
And you can see, sorry to butt in, you can see that we've got 2 volunteers there meeting and greeting people. And on the left-hand side of the screen, those notice boards, that's the local information I was talking about. So there's photos of the church, photos of people. So even at this point, there's the beginnings of a queue. Also, really importantly, there are Welsh cakes there, which pacifies any queue. But it's good for people to have something to look at while they're waiting. And obviously, we do this as quickly as possible. But as Beren said, you've got to get all the information. Otherwise, it's the record itself isn't as good. Sorry, back up to you.
No. And if anyone has any questions, please feel free to interrupt. I don't mind that at all. So this is what collection day can look like, essentially. I'm trying to get at. So there is the clear stages in that process. So unfortunately, and copyright. And unfortunately, it is a primary consideration when collecting material for publishing online. So for every contributor that we met on that day, we have essentially a consent form outlining why and how their item is going to be shared on people's collection, and the fact that it's going to be shared under a particular, the terms of use from people's collection side is that we share everything under the Creative Archive license, which I'll explain a bit in the next slide. But this consent form gives a bit of information to that contributor of the day, and also it's a record for yourself as well. So just what happens, I have a set of them here from this project, and we have templates of these that we can share with groups that they are free to, edit to serve the purpose of their project. For instance, to add in, I think Martin, you added in so that the further uses, so the fact that the Daisies or Llandav could use the material for, on their website for promotional material and that kind of thing. Again, it's making sure that the person that's contributing is informed in how their item is going to be used and made available to the wider public. So the Creative Archive license that is used on people's collection, essentially it allows anyone to use any material that's been published on the site as long it's for non-commercial use, so they can't make money out of anything that's been shared with us. That if it's going to be used elsewhere, that this license is shared with it, so shared alike. So every item is crediting, so attribution to the owner creator, and any item can be used for endorsement or derogatory use. So those are the 4 rules really in terms of use of any item on people's collection. Essentially, it's designed for to ease the of personal research or personal interest, for educational purposes, and for community level activities of free exhibitions or something like that. So I've avoided it long enough. So what is copyright? So essentially, copyright is automatically created and is attributed to the author of a particular item, whether that be a photographer that takes a photograph, someone that writes a letter or poem or a book. So this copyright and control over the item does not need to be registered. It's automatically created and owned by the creator. Obviously, if I were to, take a photograph of a famous painting, that wouldn't be a product of skill, labor, or judgment compared with actually someone painting it. So the work must be an original product of skill, labor, and judgment. So that's by the author. And yeah, copyright remains for a fixed duration normally, and our rule of thumb normally is around 70 years after the death of the author. So it's quite considerable time of protection over that material. And essentially, what that copyright determines is that the creator or the owner controls the use and reproduction of that work. So that's why getting the consent from the copyright holder is sometimes quite can be quite crucial in before making it available online. Now, the copyright holder and owner, go back here, can be two different people or institutions. So just to nip that at the bud, as it were, because sometimes we do get people coming to collection days with, say, newspaper clippings, or talking about something that their ancestor was involved in. Obviously, the newspaper clipping might have been in the attic or in a scrapbook for 20, 30 years, but the creator of that newspaper clipping would have been the newspaper publisher, not the current owner of that just piece of paper. So the work of judgment, skill, and labor was the writing of the article, and that is owned by the publisher of the newspaper. So for instance, in this example, the owner of the item is also the owner of, I think this one is a map, I believe, so it was by the cartographer T. Badeslade. The owner is Haverford West Library, but the creator was T. Badeslade. So the T. Badeslade would have copyright ownership, but the owner of the item is Haverford West Library. So that can cause sort of confusion sometimes, but it's something just to be aware of when you're meeting and greeting and going through material, because it can quickly so filter down what you potentially digitize on that day. It can really help with, what can be essentially legally digitize and publish or make use of without having to chase down a copyright holder. Again, I'll go quickly with this. These slides are normally for longer term projects. So clearing copyright if not there in person on the day can be time consuming, and we have tools available like a duration chart just to guide, well, is it still in copyright to begin with, and if it's still in copyright, tracking down copyright holders can be quite time consuming, but permissions should always be received in writing if possible. And as I mentioned, clearly stating the intended use of the material. So this is an example of our timelines of our copyright duration chart, which is quite handy. Again, you'll see at the bottom, normally it boils down to copyright expires 70 years after the death of the author. So if it's post what is it now, 1950 or thereabouts, it's probably still in copyright, or actually more than that. It can be quite a rabbit hole sometimes. So sometimes it's much easier to focus on material that is photographs or so that was within the family, so families photographs of like say weddings and that kind of thing. If a copyright holder is not known, it can be referred to as an orphan work. So this is where the copyright holder, the information is not with us. Doesn't mean that we can just automatically just go ahead and scan it and throw caution to the wind. Under the law, there is a process called due diligence, which means attempting to find or locate the copyright holder. Again, this can be time consuming, but best practice sometimes is to, word of mouth, oh, who was the local photographer with this? A lot of the, wedding photographs and, local papers and stuff like that, if there are that kind of material. Then if the copyright holder is found, you follow previous guidelines of getting their consent to upload. If if they cannot be traced, then you can kind of make a risk assessment of, well, what's the risk of publishing this material or not? And there are a few questions we can ask ourselves to determine that. And that takes me to, so like the two past slides is for, I suppose, longer term projects, but on the day, you're in the hot seats and you have to make quick decisions. So the kind of questions I tend to ask myself, and we went through this process in Project here, was, well, first of all, when was the item created? Like the Paris magazine that was published in 1915, over 100 years ago. Likelihood is the risk is very low in making that available, considering that the 70 years of the death of the author and thinking of that. Was the item created with commercial intent? So this is the one that always keeps coming up. To take my example of a newspaper clipping, for instance, a newspaper is produced and sold. So it's created with commercial intent in mind. It's a bit different to say a few, if someone in the family goes on and taking photographs of the local community or local events and stuff like that. There's less risk than involved in publishing that material, and potentially easier to find out who the creator was as well. So things to look out for, things like newspaper clippings, specifically if they are published within the past 70 years. Secondly, so if a photographer's stamp or a publisher mark, that is a good indication that there's some sense of that the author, the creator, was trying to regain some kind of control over their material. But of course, you can, and a lot of projects have done this, if there isn't any maker's mark, or, a lot of times with newspaper clippings, it's a clipping and you don't know from what paper it is and that kind of thing. You can add a little disclaimer of, asking the audience that comes to people's collection, do you know who's in the, who took this photograph? Can you share more information about this item? All efforts have been made to find the copyright holder, but if you have information, please get in touch. So that's a nice way of sort of crowdsourcing that sort of side of things as well. Another sort of thing to look out for when you're going through material on the day as well is there any sort of data protection issues within those materials? Does it contain any sort of sensitive information or personal information of a living individual that could cause any distress or reputational damage or anything like that?
Never underestimate the risk of that. It might sound like quite an obscure point, but in a previous incarnation, I worked in a reference library, and one year we decided to do a display in the reference library that we'd been given material by, I think it was the prison service or the archives or something, and we put up records of photographs of prisoners from 100 years ago. Most of them were from 100 years ago, and they were mug shots and that sort of thing, and transcripts of court cases, photos of Cardiff prison as it was, newspaper headlines, and it looked really good. And one old lady came in and she said, "Oh, that's my grandmother." She was fine about it, but you've always got to think, as Berrien said, if there's information there that could be relating to someone who is still alive, would they necessarily want it shared?
Yeah, and even if they are, like in that example, passed away, there's that sort of moral and ethical kind of consideration as well of next of kin and family that might be not very happy with that information being essentially made public knowledge. So like I say, don't scare you away with this sort of section of it, but if in doubt, there's always of digitizing something and then able to do some more research afterwards, because on the day, it's quite can be quite intense depending on how many people are coming in. But then you can, feel free to, you can get in contact with us for a second opinion. But if you have any doubts, just err on the side of caution, I suppose. But a few of these sort of questions of thinking of commercial intent and behind the original item and the date in which it was created as well.
And what we did is, sorry, I keep.
No, please, yeah.
I think on that point, what we did on the form was to say that we may not use your item if for whatever reason it's not suitable, and we will then delete the scan that's taken, so people don't the following day go onto the People's Collection site and think, well, where's my photo of whoever? It's a disclaimer in effect. Yeah, you covering yourself. Yeah,
again, you're informing the contributors of the processes that will be following the collection day itself. Another point, obviously, with data protection is if there are any modern day photographs of children in their age 16, obviously there's data protection issues with that, not making them available online without the consent of parents or guardians and so on. So obviously, if there's a photograph of a group of 12 or more children, something like that, in an activity in the church, are you going to go around all those 12 families and to ask for permission? Is it more work than it's worth, perhaps? So yeah, things like that to consider. I should point out as well, so before anything goes up on People's Collection, as in live or for other people to see, we do have a moderation stage as well. So we do a pre-moderation stage for when things are uploaded, it goes through moderation and then becomes live on the site. And we look for essentially these three kind of issues. So obvious copyright breaches. Obviously, we can't go into depth with vast amounts of research with every item, but if it's a glaring kind of obvious sort of, like I say, commercial intent, so newspapers, modern day postcards, or something has a photographer's mark or something like that on it, we then get in contact with the contributor or with you to make sure that was that permission was sought. Again, data protection issues, like we've just mentioned, various inaccuracies if we can spot them. Obviously, there's just two of us doing moderation. Even space. One of us is from Merthyr, I'm from North Wales, so we split the local knowledge as much as possible. But if it's a clear mistake or in the title of the location or something like that, we would jump in to correct and that kind of information to make it more to make the item more resourceful. We don't do any quality control per se on the quality of the scans like that, but if there's something obvious, again, we can contact with users to sort of to guide, to make sure that next time perhaps it'll be a smoother process. And we do have a takedown policy on the site as well. So, for instance, if you do digitize something, upload something, and without your knowledge, there's someone, oh, that was my granddad that took that photograph, and I didn't give you permission, we'd be able to take it down. There we go. So that's the first stage of before getting into the fun part of gathering the information and then digitizing the material. So this is the information to go along with items. So again, the term metadata. So what is metadata? So essentially, metadata is the information about a particular piece of information. So if we think of a photograph as a visual piece of information, then metadata is the descriptive information to describe that item. So metadata is key to ensuring that resources will survive within, a digital archive or library and made accessible into the future. So obviously, without this piece of information, or pieces of information, a resource can lose its meaning. It can be lost into the ether of a vast digital archive. It can give context, obviously more information, the more resourceful it is. And like the example earlier, it allows retrieval from an archive in various ways. So keyword searches, can have an example, through categories, through location even. So that there's various ways of having these sort of these gates, if you like, for people to access that information from various points. I would say that, metadata should be certainly a primary consideration within a workflow, even more so than the actual digitization itself, because again, without that information, how resourceful is just an image with no information? What archives, libraries, and People's Collection does as a sort of a digital archive or museum is structuring that information into various fields. So internationally, there are various sort of structures, like or formats of how to collect this information, the metadata, and one of which is the Dublin Core Standard, and this is the one that People's Collection has sort of adopted to help structure the information on the site. So as I showed you earlier, the item page has a title, description, has the categories, the date it was created, the owner, the creator, the location, and the rights, all in that item page. And this is the information that is gathered on that day as well. Obviously, some information you can enrich it afterwards, but when you're sitting down in front of the owner of the item, obviously that's your best source of information. They hopefully will be able to give you, those sort of little gems that you would not be able to find online, or by searching or looking a little bit closer at the image. So this is the structure that we follow, and the top one there, the identifier or the file name, is absolutely key in a collection database, because each item should have its own identifier, like a code, if you like, or an unique identifier for each item created. This, on a busy collecting day, it's sometimes easy to lose track of, what number of, because we want each item to have its own coding. Otherwise, you might have, the same identifier with two pieces of information on information sheets. So ways of controlling that and keeping track of it. So again, best practice is to use some kind of alphanumerical sort of coding system or structure. So you decide on something logical, sort of consistent, that people can follow on the day. So you might have a particular, a couple of volunteers that be more comfortable with this kind of work of, again, depending on the resources that you have. But like I say, things to consider. So thinking how many people will be filling out metadata forms. So if there's more than one, easy to get numbers mixed up, essentially. So how are you going to sort of avoid that confusion potentially? Also, how would people be digitizing as well? So again, making sure that this item, whatever it might be, when it goes through that workflow, that identifier, it remains with it and is not accidentally written over or split or separated, as it were. So there are various sort of approaches of doing this. So on this, on the right hand side here, one example we've used before is to have a list, a pre-printed list on a piece of paper of all the identifiers that potentially are going to be used on that day. And as one item comes through, so the first item of the day, whether it be ABC 001, I can cross that off the list, add it to the information sheet I'm filling out with the title, description, and so on. then clipped with the photograph and then passed on to the digitizer. Then that digitizer knows what to name that file, saved, and then passed back to the owner. Again, if there are more than one volunteers collecting metadata on the day, you could create 2 batches of numbers, as it were, so that there isn't the risk of someone, perhaps getting confused or forgetting to scratch something off or something like that. So, for example, in the example below here, so person 1 has the batch, ABC 001 to 050, then person 2 has 51 to 100, and that's, vice versa. But I would advise to give enough buffer. So perhaps in that example, the first person with 1 to 99, the second person 100 to 199, just to allow enough wriggle room, just in case, at the one before the end, there's, oh, here's a little booklet with 7 images in it. Another sort of, actually, this is what we used in Troeder Hill, the power of the raffle book. So with something like this, you rip out one side. So say item 1, this one, item 1 is given the number, what's that, 99? Sorry, it's getting blurred. Oh, 96, sorry. And that is, paper clipped with the information sheet and the item and passed over to the person that's digitizing. Obviously, this number would also be noted on the information sheet as well. But then you're just going through the work, through the raffle, the right side of the raffle book. One thing that's really handy by using these as well is if someone, if you're using a camera rather than one of our scanners to digitize, you can place the item on the table with that raffle ticket next to it and take a photo. Because sometimes with a camera, whether it be a phone or a SLR or whatever might be used, you can't really name the file there and then. So by having that sort of visual representation of the numbers associated with it, then you can crop that out afterwards in the editing phase. So this is an example of identifiers. So this project, quite a few years ago now, but that alphanumerical sort of coding structure. So project was Voices of the Great War. So they used VGW as the alphabet, and then a numbering system, so 1, 2, and then I think it was quite a big project, a few hundred, maybe a few thousand at the end. I can see here, this is an example of a multi-part item as well. So it's a postcard with image at the front and notation on the back. And another sort of approach or a system could be used in this case, rather than 1 and 2, because it's one item, could be VGW 0001A and 1B, so front and back. And then next item would be 2, 3, 4, it might be 5A, 5B, 5C, 5, for multi-part items. Again, as long as it's a consistent approach from everyone, it's much easier then to process that information when it comes to accumulating all the information at the end. So this is a good example from of metadata from the site. So we have, well, it's a multi-part item, so the front and back here, there's a bit of information on the back. Along with it, there is some sort of background information, some context to the postcard or the greeting card as well. So from this bit of description here, we get the what the image is of, when it was sent, by who, to who, what their roles were, or their occupation, and well, the year, and a bit of information about PC Jones, first posting 1908, where it was sent from as well. So it's a lot of information that some of it has come from the item itself, from visual information on the postcard. But a lot of it is local knowledge, and this is what is key really when you have the opportunity of sitting down with individuals on the day. So try and ask them if you're in that seat of collecting information, a bit of information, as much information as is relevant, if you like, to make that item more resourceful, perhaps a bit more interesting as well, with that social and community history and how it fits into into the history of the community. Along here as well, we have the owner and the categories to go along with it. So the period of time, city times, place, churches, chapels, and other places of worship, because a picture of the church, and various tags then to link it with other items as well. And so all this information makes it resourceful, makes it accessible by searching through the site, and it's a great a great asset to have on the site. Ooh. So collecting that information on the day itself. Again, we have sort of templates to share with you, to be able to print out, to make a batch of them ready for the day to collect that information. Again, these sort of these fields or spaces to fill follow that sort of WCORE standard sort of field information that will be then uploaded to the site. So here's an example of an item that was collected in Troedyrhiw. So as you can see here, file name or the identifier, so TCD, so Troedyrhiw Collection Day, that's what we decided on. I think 072A and 72B, so we know it's a multi-part item, it's 2 digital images. The title, a description, an idea of tags. Again, tags and stuff like that could possibly be done afterwards, not necessarily a priority on the day itself. The date that it was created, the original creator, any other information. So if there was copyright information to go along with it, the location, and the owner of that item itself. And this item, then when it was uploaded, looks like this. So we have the Girl Friendly Society members card. We have the location. There was a multi-part with the front and back. And we have the description and the tags and categories. So all that information presented in a great way on the site. Go to this. So once we have, so right at the start, we have a consent form from the owner, giving consent for their items to be digitized. We have a example here, for that individual, say if they bring in 4 or 5 items, you would have 4 or 5 items similar to this, with the information, the metadata to go along with them, which would then be passed on to who was digitizing along with the items themselves. So with digitizing, there's various ways to go about it. Again, I think it's easier when it comes time, if you are planning a collection day, I can give a bit more a detailed sort of run through of the processes. But essentially, first of all, from that, if you're using a scanner, you're creating a high resolution or high quality image that you can then create copies of for, say, publishing on people's collection, or to use in an exhibition, a book, or whatever the intended purposes are. So again, this is just sort of best practice or guidelines that we give to groups and for these kind of projects. Is firstly you create that the high quality image that would look a little bit like this. Those are only very large digital files. of high resolution and in a particular format, then you'd create what we refer to as a web ready, something ready to be uploaded that's been cropped or rotated the right way around, and file size reduced, the resolution reduced, and the file format apt for sharing on websites like People's Collection. So that's again, best practice. But then again, depends on the group, depends on the intended sort of outcomes that you're going for. You could digitize straight to JPEG, for instance, if that's easy. If you have no intent of keeping those master files, because again, that's more responsibility down the line of actually managing that side of things.
Beryl, I'm just conscious that I think we're overrunning slightly.
Yeah.
I know Emma's had to leave us, but I just wonder if perhaps if anyone else has to leave, if they have any questions now, perhaps we could send this information to people if they're interested in going ahead.
Absolutely, I can send these, and all I was going to say is we have guidelines and equipment to be able to loan out for free for days like that as well. And like I say, probably easier if you intend to do that. I can arrange a more one-to-one or one with a group, a training of how to go about it. So that was, and I can go through how to upload and stuff like that as well. So yeah.
If anyone has any questions, perhaps you could use the question and answer box, which is enabled. We'll send out all this information to you separately along with the slide. And obviously you'll have my email and Berrien. So if there is something that you think of after this, you can always get in touch and we'll do our best to answer. Let's give people a few minutes just to see if there are any questions. No, I don't think so. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming along. Berrien, thanks for the information. And as I said, if anyone wants to get in touch, you'll have our email addresses. And I hope it was useful. And I would encourage you to host a heritage recording day and to work with People's Collection. From experience, they're very good. And I think you'll find it a worthwhile activity. So thank you all again, and speak to you soon, no doubt.
Yeah, thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.